Henri Désiré Landru, the French Bluebeard. Henri Désiré Landru, also known as the French Bluebeard, was a notorious French serial killer who was convicted of murdering at least 10 women, along with a young man and a teenage boy, between 1914 and 1919. Landru lured his victims through personal ads, promising them marriage and financial security during the turbulent years of World War I. He would later kill them, burn their bodies, and take their money. His chillingly methodical approach and manipulation of vulnerable women earned him the nickname Bluebeard, after the legendary French folk character who killed his wives. Early life and descent into crime. Henri Désiré Landru was born on April 12, 1869, in Paris, France. Despite being raised in a respectable family and receiving a decent education, Landru quickly turned to a life of crime. He started his criminal career with petty thefts, fraud, and embezzlement. He served multiple prison sentences for various offenses in his early adult years. Landru's criminal ingenuity grew more elaborate over time. He began to use his charm and wit to manipulate people, and by the early 20th century, he had devised a plan to swindle women out of their money. His scams evolved into something much darker when he realized that he could not only steal from these women but also eliminate them entirely without raising suspicion during the chaos of World War I. The modus operandi. Landru's method was as chilling as it was effective. He placed advertisements in the Lonely Hearts sections of Paris newspapers, presenting himself as a wealthy widower seeking companionship. Using various aliases, he targeted middle-aged women who had lost their husbands in the war or were otherwise financially vulnerable. He portrayed himself as a charming, well-to-do gentleman who could provide security during a time when France was devastated by war. Once he had gained his victims' trust, Landru would invite them to his secluded villa in Gambais, a small village outside of Paris. He often convinced them to bring their life savings and personal belongings, promising marriage and a secure future. Once they were isolated in his villa, he would murder them, often by strangulation, and then dismember their bodies. Landru disposed of the remains by burning them in a small cast-iron stove in his kitchen. The ashes and bones were scattered in the garden or nearby woods, making it nearly impossible to identify his victims. Landru was meticulous in covering his tracks. He used false identities, rented multiple properties under different names, and made sure that the women he killed had no close family members who would immediately report them missing. He also maintained detailed lists and records of his victims, though this meticulousness would later contribute to his downfall. The victims between 1914 and 1919, Landru is believed to have killed at least 10 women, along with one young man, the son of one of his victims, and a teenage boy. The confirmed victims were women who had responded to his personal ads, and had been lured to his villa under the pretense of marriage. The women Landru killed were 1. Jeanne Cutchit, and her son, André Cutchit. 2. Bertha Horn. 3. André Babely. 4. Célestine Buisson. 5. Louise Léonard. 6. Anna Colomb. 7. Anne-Marie Pascal. 8. Marie-Thérèse Marchadia. 9. Marie-Angélique Guillan. 10. Madeleine Mercadier. Landru's victims were typically middle-aged women, but he occasionally targeted younger women, such as André Babely, who was just 19 years old when she disappeared. Investigation and capture. Landru's downfall began in 1919, when the family of one of his victims, Célestine Buisson, became suspicious of her sudden disappearance. Buisson's sister reported her missing to the police, and an investigation was launched. Police discovered that Buisson had last been seen in the company of a man matching Landru's description, and they traced her movements to his villa in Gambais. Initially, the police had difficulty identifying Landru, as he had used several aliases and false addresses. However, they eventually tracked him down to an apartment in Paris, where he was living under yet another assumed name. When the police arrested Landru, they found detailed records of his victims, including notes on their finances and possessions. These records were instrumental in proving that Landru had systematically swindled and murdered the women. Despite the meticulous nature of his crimes, Landru had made one fatal error: he had kept track of his victims in a ledger, noting when and how he had disposed of them. The ledger, combined with the testimony of neighbors who had seen the women enter his villa but never leave, was enough to convict him. Trial and execution. Henri Désiré Landru's trial began in November 1921 and became a media sensation in France. The public was fascinated by the macabre details of the case, and the press dubbed him the Bluebeard of Gambais, in reference to the legendary Bluebeard figure who murdered his wives. The trial was highly publicized, and Landru himself contributed to the spectacle with his calm demeanor, arrogance, and occasional humor. Throughout the trial, Landru maintained his innocence, denying that he had murdered the women. However, the evidence against him was overwhelming. His detailed ledger, the missing persons reports, and the testimony of witnesses who had seen the women enter his villa but never leave painted a damning picture. Landru was convicted of 11 murders, 10 women and the son of one of the victims, and sentenced to death. He never confessed to the murders, even as he faced execution. On February 25, 1922, Landru was executed by guillotine in Versailles. He remained stoic and silent until the end, never admitting to his crimes or expressing any remorse. Legacy. Henri Désiré Landru's case remains one of the most infamous in French criminal history. His calculated manipulation of vulnerable women during a time of war, combined with the cold and methodical manner in which he murdered them, made him one of the most chilling serial killers of the early 20th century. Landru's case has been the subject of numerous books, films, and documentaries, including the 1963 French film Landru directed by Claude Chabrol. The case also contributed to the enduring legend of Bluebeard, the fictional character who murdered his wives, and has been cited as one of the earliest examples of a modern serial killer who used charm and manipulation to lure his victims.